listening to Inside Voices on WNHHLP 103.5 FM. Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening to everyone that's listening. Welcome to Inside Voices. My name is Georgia Gober, and I am the director of Hope for New Haven, as well as the co-founder of Circle, who is basically the host of this community conversation platform. And I am thrilled. I always say I'm thrilled, but I'm absolutely thrilled to have on with me today the executive director of Circle, as well as um, my co-founder of Circle, Kim Harris and Tammy Robinson. I'm gonna just pause for a minute to have you guys just say a good welcome and a good morning to the audience.
Yeah, welcome to me and Kim again. We're back. Well, I think this is my second time back. Kim, I think you've probably been on a couple more times than I have, but it's wonderful to be back again, Georgia and Kim, with both of you. Looking forward to a good conversation.
Yes, hey, hey, and hello to all. And thank you once again for the opportunity.
So I called up Kim the other day and I said, Kim, I've been really thinking about this platform and I'm looking and seeing everything that's going on around us. And I'm asking the question, are we meeting the moment? And we're going to talk, we're just going to take this time to just sort of like a counseling session, a public counseling session with my circle folks to kind of talk about what's going on. I think everybody knows generally what's happening in the world around us. I didn't have an opportunity to wish my Jamaican people, and the Haitian folks as well as the Cuban folks, safety during that Hurricane Melissa. And as a Jamaican, I actually just left Jamaica like 2 weeks before the storm, and so that has been touching me and impacting me, just kind of seeing the devastation with the natural hurricane, but also being back here in this country where we're talking about people going hungry in one of the richest country in the world. And not only are people going hungry because the price of food is just astronomical right now. And I know there's been inflation in the system, but the price of food being where it is and having a conversation where the government is shut down and people who are either working are not being paid for their work, for their labor, or people who are dependent on critical government subsidy just not getting that help. And we want to talk about that more broadly, but kind of also lift up a crisis that's occurring in Connecticut right now around the Cure for Kids program. Because we're going to hear lots of conversation in the upcoming months and years about how Connecticut has solved the childcare crisis, has solved the affordability crisis, the access crisis for parents. But there isn't a lot being said about what is currently happening for parents because all of those conversations centers around 2027 and beyond. But there's a crisis brewing that's being compounded by everything that's going on around them. So I've been feeling this general level of anxiety, and Kim and I, we chop it up all the time. We get on the phone, we talk late at night, we talk early in the morning. Kim always called to encourage and to be encouraged. And we have these conversations outside of this sphere, but I wanted to bring folks on. And Tammy, we talk a lot as well. Tammy, notoriously calls at 7 o'clock in the morning.
Not every day.
Almost every day,
Almost every day.
just checking in and wondering what's going on. And so, to the extent that I'm having this anxiety and I'm like, how do we meet the moment? I just felt that it was so important for me to sort of just gather my team, gather
Yeah.
the team and just kind of speak to that anxiety, speak more specifically about the crisis that's going on in the Care for Kids program and how that could potentially undermine this bigger, broader vision that we have for the state of Connecticut's families of having universal access and universal affordability for childcare. So this is, and when we were talking about what do we talk about here, I was really struggling because I'm struggling with how I'm feeling in this moment. And I usually have greater clarity sometimes, but that's just, I'm just feeling this level of anxiety around me. And I wanted to give voice to that and speak specifically about what part of that anxiety is related to. But also just saying, how can we meet this moment? And I think that's not a question that I expect us to answer today, but definitely wanted to say publicly, how do we meet this moment? So I'm going to step back here and have Kim and Tammy also just share with the audience, what are you feeling? Are you feeling the same? And just give an opportunity to give voice to that anxiety, if there is.
Kim, do you want to take it?
Um, you know, I can start here. I think for me, the biggest dilemma was the kids. Are we going to get kids through this without coming to school, being hungry? Uh, because my parents are frantic.
Mhm.
They were absolutely frantic. And we just started the ball rolling in terms of places and spaces that they can go to get food.
Mhm.
And I can remember one parent saying to me, Miss Kim, I'll go without food. I'll eat crumbs. I'll eat morsels. But I don't want my child to have to go through not being able to have the food that they need to have. So for me, it was really about the kids, number one, but families. And just, I think the other thing was um, the parents who never had to go to a food bank or a pantry. It was really hard for them. And, we had to give them comfort and we had to talk a lot about, you know, pride cometh before the fall. Yeah, forget that. We're all here together and we're going to work through this together. And I think it was just a little taste of what could possibly happen, if we're not prepared. But how do you get prepared for such a situation as this?
Mm.
And I think that may be, Georgia, a little bit of your anxiety that you're feeling is we had no control. We had no control over the situation and it hit quick, fast, and swiftly. So how do you move forward when you don't have that prep time? You know, I'm gonna just go to my little biblical thing here. In the Bible, we have lots of prep time. It talks about what is to come, what's to happen. So we know either we get it together or we don't. But really here, there was no prep time. But I think we have to think smarter. We have to think smarter about the things that we're doing and how we're doing it. How do we set people up for success? How do we set people up for the possibilities of what could happen? We got a taste of it. We got a taste of it. Now, how do we start the conversations with the power of the pen? Our public servants. How do we start the conversation with um, other organizations who have funding to help this? I think that we have to always be on their radar. We have to always make sure that the basics are going to be able to be covered in a situation that could possibly happen again. I mean, I know there was a vote, and I think the vote is until the end of January. So now we got a couple months. How do we prepare? And just really flipping the scenario, how do we have success
Yeah.
in turbulent times. And I'll throw it to you, Tammy, or Georgia. Maybe you have to comment on
Yeah.
that.
Uh, Again, Tammy, you're the one that when Kim and I speak and we think of, stuff that needs to be done, you are charged with the action. So,
Hmm.
I'm gonna give you the space to kind of speak to again what you're feeling, um,
Hmm.
and then kind of pivot to how do we set people up for success. I think one of the big ways that we do it is with these conversations. But I'm going to throw it to you because you're the one that has to execute on the ground when
Yeah,
we
no,
say, hey, here's how we meet the moment.
yeah, I appreciate that. And I appreciate what you said, Kim, about, thinking of the children first. And, I'm a mother of two. One is in high school, the other is well past college age. And, I think about, when I'm driving around New Haven and I do see the very long lines outside of churches and food banks, especially this time of year. We're coming up on Thanksgiving and thinking about the um, the hardship that parents are dealing with, not just with their younger children, but I saw a statistic where a good chunk of the folks that are receiving SNAP benefits are college students.
Mm.
So it's not like there's an escape beyond, once you get past the age of 18, for a lot of families, the stress is coming from a lot of different places right now. And I think where we see ourselves at Circle is really opening up the floor for this conversation and to, look back at what we've been able to achieve over the last 5 years and acknowledge that we've been able to do some really groundbreaking things in the state of Connecticut, but acknowledging that there's still much more work to do and understanding that, while some people are in a better off place with it, I'm seeing that we're talking about this K-shaped economy, or if you have, investments in the stock market, things feel really good for you. And, something like 20%, the top 20% of income earners are doing 50% of the consumerism in our country, or large numbers like that. And you think about, so what about the rest of us, right? What about the 80% of us, and what is it like? Maneuvering through what has already been very expensive times, but increasingly so because there are fewer resources to fall back on. And we're fortunate to be in Connecticut where there are some resources. But I think, Georgia, to answer the last question you asked, it's really, this is the starting point. I think this is the starting point, having this conversation, putting this message out to the community, to get feedback from providers, and if providers can share what their families are going through, to start activating the community to again think that, sadly, our work is not done.
Mhm.
There is this, wonderful, look to the future in 2027, and the promise of early start. But, the reality is 2 years is a very long time. And people are going to be living with the situation that we're in right now for 2 years. And some of us are not going to make it. And unless there's intervention, unless more is done. And I think for us as a starting point, beginning the conversation and trying to get other people in the room to have this conversation, to come up with some short-term solutions for the next 2 years is where I'm thinking that we're going at Circle.
Hey, Georgia,
Mhm.
you know, Tammy, you put my mind on something, and I want to talk about boots on the ground. No pun or song intended with that. Um, so I was over at Lincoln Bastard School. It's a school in New Hallville on Friday, and I saw something that was very extraordinary. I saw the line go from Butler Street, these are car lines, Butler Street to Bassett Street over to Shelton Avenue. It
Mm.
wrapped around so far that I never seen, the last time I saw something like that was um I think when Obama was running for president. it was that deep and that serious. And I got a chance to talk to a few of the people, and there was a couple of concerns. Yes, the food, but one group of,
So Kim, so the lines were wrapped around for what? Voting or for
for
food?
food,
For
for
food.
food this Friday,
Wow.
because people didn't know where their
And
cars.
that blows my mind, Kim, because if you remember in the context of, and I don't want to make this too political, but a number of years ago, we did policy at the federal level that actually truly impacted child poverty in our country. And here we are just a short time later where we're faced with just incredibly challenging times for families around food security.
Yes. So here it goes. Food insecurity triggers a few other things. One family in particular said, I have a teenage son. I got out my car and just started talking to people. And we just need to have that pipeline where we can actually say to parents, circle is a way that you can have a voice, right? We gotta really make that line happen, and it needs to come off our lips very smoothly. But one of the triggers was this: I don't want my teenage son thinking that he has to go out and rob somebody
Mm,
to in order to help feed the family.
yeah.
Mhm.
So when those insecurities hit us, when we're faced with those types of things, other secessionary things start to happen. Crime goes up, domestic violence goes up.
Mhm.
And in New Hallville, I live, work, and die for New Hallville. Um, we've worked so hard to lessen those things. And once again, so what do we need to do? How do we shore it up, tee it up, so that we can have these conversations and then activate, as you said, Tammy, activate, Georgia, and you said call to action. So
Mm.
that needs to be one conversation. How do we start bringing parents into the fold so that can be a place where they can, first of all, feel safe about what they're about to say and trust the process.
Yeah, Kim, you shared with me, and we did in response to the conversation we had, we did a survey in our family because one of our, we meet every Wednesday as a part of our, a team meeting, and we started to talk about this insecurity, food insecurity, housing insecurity, all of those things. And based on the conversation that I heard from you, Kim, coupled with the conversation I heard at our team meeting, we sent out a survey, to our parents to say, are you okay? And I also sent out a question to the Care for Kids families, and we're gonna pivot shortly to that conversation, just to say to the Care for Kids providers, are you okay? And we heard a lot back from folks, and that was a post that was highly, people really engaged with that post. Um, but when we started to talk to our families about if they're okay, we have some families that said that they're okay. And then you have others that were saying that they were dealing all of these stress, and all of the stress is centered around economic insecurity,
Mhm.
right? And you shared with us, Kim, that in your family, some of the things that you're doing with your family, and you would make food available, as you always do, Kim, because you are true and true, like a community on the ground, boots on the ground type person. But you shared that you couldn't give additional food
Mhm.
to the rest of the folks in the community. So can you just talk a little bit about that so that the audience can understand what we are seeing on the ground in our center with families?
Yeah, so we usually have lots of leftover food. We get lots of food that comes in that we can get out into the community. And this week we could not get it out into the community because of what was happening with our parents.
Mhm.
So we feed a lot of people in the community, not just our school, but in the community. And we feel very fortunate and blessed that people feel comfortable enough to be able to say, hey, the school, Harrison Tucker is a pit stop. Let's go over there. Let's drop some food off. We know that it's going to get out into the community. But this particular time, last week, last week we could not, the food was gone. I mean, people who, as I said earlier, people who don't even take it, won't even think about coming over to the share table. I mean, it was actually it was beautiful to see that people were letting their guard down so that they can come and feed their families. But we had nothing left to get out into the community. Our families, you know, it was just it broke my heart really, and just had to go in the bathroom and have a moment. But yeah, it was hard. It was hard because we know that the families in the community rely on it as well.
Yeah. So I'm going to use this as an opportunity to pivot to the conversation that we are primarily here for. Um, and I'm getting concerned about my volume. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah. So um, I'll just talk up a lot louder. But I want to share with folks because it always feels like I'm having these conversations over and over again with us about Care for Kids. Care for Kids is a perpetual topic of conversation, especially when we are engaging legislators for them to understand how things are impacting families. For the folks who are listening, Care for Kids is the largest subsidy that is made available to families and to families of young children. And when we say young children, we should probably share that Care for Kids is also utilized by folks that are older than, babies and toddlers and preschoolers because families in the before and after school program utilize Care for Kids as well as in the summer camp program. Right? So it's available, it's the largest program that's been made available. And we went from serving historically about 14,000, I think it's children, and now we're up to 21,000 children. So Connecticut has made a lot of investments in this program, and we do want to recognize that, right? But the fact that now the Care for Kids program, which has an enrollment management system in place, is now taken between 7 to 9 months for parents to qualify. That's a big problem, right? Because the parents that use the Care for Kids program are the parents that are the most vulnerable. They are parents who have income. I think it's 65, I think it's either 60 or 65% of state median income to qualify initially for the program. I want to say it's 60%. And after you qualify for the program, you can remain on the program until your income goes up to 85% of state median income. And we chaired the governor some 5 years ago when he made that possible. But right now, and I should say prior to today, they utilized Care for Kids or ARPA funding to enroll more children on the more families on the Care for Kids program. And now, as ARPA dollars are, coming to an end, the Care for Kids system or program has to basically reduce the caseload of families and children that are on the program. And as a result, if a parent wants to apply for Care for Kids today, historically traditionally, it was a 30 to a 45 day period to get through the process. Care for Kids was doing a really good job during the pandemic to get, or in the wake of the pandemic, to get
Mhm.
families through that process at a much shorter pace. And there's been a lot, I have to say, of improvement in the Care for Kids system. However, because there was no additional funds allocated to the Care for Kids program in the last legislative session, we now have a situation where we have 21,000 children that are on this program with a huge amount of families that are still needing this program. And because parents are staying on the program longer, which is always the battle that we had, do we increase the income limit to keep parents on the program longer, or do we keep it at a lower level so that we can bring on more families? And I think the governor and the commissioner made a calculation, made a decision that, it's best to allow families to stay longer on the program, and sort of like manage the enrollment of new families that are coming on. And also, they made a decision to increase the subsidy, which is something that they had to do by federal mandate anyway, but they made a decision to increase the subsidy. And I can say I've seen a lot of my families benefit from those policy decisions. I saw my family's income or out-of-pocket tuition fee drop precipitously because now their family fee is capped at 7%, which is what we're trying to do here in Connecticut. So that's what's happening with Care for Kids. And as a result of families having to wait 7 months, 7 to 9 months to access a program where it would typically take about 30 to 45 days, now we have childcare centers that are doing two things. They are turning, well, I wouldn't say they're turning families away. Families are turning away from childcare centers because they cannot afford to pay full fee until they're approved for Care for Kids, given the 7 to 9 month wait time. And or childcare providers are negotiating with families to say, come in and we're going to take the hit and the loss, right? And we're going to negotiate the price. So even though this tuition fee is what my cost of care is, and it's not even my true cost of care, I'm going to negotiate down that price. And so you have providers who are reporting that they're taking a loss and it's not sustainable. They're having to fundraise to do scholarship for families, or they're just shutting down classrooms.
Mhm.
Right. And Tammy, you host the circle meetings every every other Saturday.
Saturday.
We have an upcoming circle meeting, and we've been talking about this here. Kim and I are actual providers, and we're going to talk about what we're seeing in our program. But can you just share with folks what you have been hearing in those circle meetings for several months now?
Yeah, no, this has been an ongoing conversation, and it's so interesting because I'm in other spaces and I don't necessarily hear other people voicing this. But in our meetings with our provider community, this has been the the communication from our folks. They've been put in a situation where they are trying their best to do what they love, which is to nurture and care for and educate children, and still be able to keep the doors open, still be able to pay staff, and still provide that safe learning environment for young children. And it's that's the Sophie's choice of this work almost every time. So it's incredible to see that, again, I started in this space some 10, 11 years ago, and Care for Kids was the hot button issue when I started in 2014. And here we are again, still talking about Care for Kids. And, the providers are having to make those very difficult choices of closing down classrooms, closing down their spaces. In some instances, we've heard of people shutting down and using their space for Airbnbs. So, what happens in that scenario is parents have less choice. And ultimately, the children end up struggling. And if you're attached to the K through 12 system in any way, a lot of the conversations that, they're having is, the post-COVID child and how challenging or difficult it is for them to engage those young children into the learning environment at the K through 12 level. And it's in this situation where families are choosing not to put their children in childcare in those first 5 years is going to unfortunately exacerbate some of the struggles children are going to face as they go into school, because they're not getting the socialization that they need in those early years, and the experiences of being in the classroom with teachers who aren't stressed out about whether or not they're going to get paid. And so that's the big thing I think, Georgia, that we're hearing is this is a good time for some and a not so great time for many others, unfortunately.
Going back to that K-shaped economy
Yeah,
where 20% doing really very well and the other 80% really struggling.
yeah.
So, and we're seeing some of those struggles in our program, and we have the Early Start Grant Funds, which is the promised pathway and vehicle through which we are going to make universal childcare available to families, right? And as an early start provider, what I can say, we're still impacted by the Care for Kids by the Care for Kids crisis right now because as an early start provider, as we are moving towards a 2027 vision and promise, we still have to rely on Care for Kids dollars to act as what we call the three economic legs, right? To basically support childcare. The three economic leg is early start, or if there are other iterations like school readiness, CDC, all of that, but now everything is early start, Care for Kids, and family fee. The promise in 2012, 2027 is that Early Start will pay the true cost of care. So you don't need that third leg of the Care for Kids dollars to prop up programs, right? But right now, even though we have the early start funds and parents are benefiting from those early start funds, there is still a pressure being placed on the providers because we are missing that third leg. So we have that third leg sort of like ripped out from under us, and we're trying to balance ourselves with those two legs. So, Kim, have you seen, well, talk to me about what's happening in your program. You're a newly early start provider. So, what's going on with you in your program?
At first, I did not know how to present this to parents, just sharing my stuff here. I didn't know how to present it to parents. I'm like, oh man, early start. So parents were coming in. Well, maybe let me backtrack a little bit. Before I became an early start center, parents were coming in, and when they found out that they could not get on or get into the Care for Kids program, I didn't see them anymore. I'm like,
Mhm.
oh my goodness, this is going to blow a hole and just this just even surviving because people were coming in, but we could not service them because they could
Mhm.
not afford to be in childcare. Then when we became an early start participant, people were coming, but they were looking for a sliding scale.
Mm.
I I didn't know how to use the words to just say, okay, we're state funded. It's going to be all right. We're going to drop what you make into the portal, and we're going to be able to see what it is that you're going to actually pay. People had a problem with that. They didn't want to give up. They didn't want to give up their information for financial, and so that presented another problem. And we could take them, and they could pay the whole fee, which they could not afford, or they could come in with nothing at all. So now that I've got myself educated here on the early start talking points, it's definitely getting better in terms of how we receive people. But my other center is not an early start center.
Mm.
Mm.
So it's an under three center, and we're getting slammed over there because we're not an early start unless the parents come in with Care for Kids in their hand. They're out of the whole mechanism of being a part of the early childhood world. So numbers will go down. And not only that, when we have to negotiate, the
Are you
quality
doing
of care.
are you doing a lot of negotiating in that center, Kim?
I'm not. Oh, in that center, yes, she is. She's doing some negotiating. But here we go. How do you give teachers raises?
Yeah.
How do you continue to afford the vegan vegetarian meals? How do you afford to keep those things going? The quality that we're providing, if we're taking from Peter to pay Paul, so that we can ensure that kids get a, a formidable education.
Mm-hmm.
Because for us, we've been around forever, and our heart is really soft when it comes to children really having the opportunity for success. Because if not us, then it's maybe an illegal facility
Yeah.
or it's a stay-at-home facility. And now kids go into the Board of Ed, who's been working so hard to just uplift kids and to just kind of get on track with how they're educating kids. Now it's like it's a step back. It's two steps forward and a step back for
And
what the outcome is.
that's going to be the challenge when we go into the legislative session, right? To try
Yeah.
to say to legislators who just put $300 million aside for childcare, when we go back and say, "Hey, we have a crisis, we have a problem," they're going to be like, "What?
You
What do
guys always have your hands out.
But I think it is so important because I think for so many people, they're confused about why it is that we're constantly coming back with our hands out. It feels like, and this kind of, I think, reveals just how underfunded early care has been. That
Yeah,
even when we get $300 million, that is still, while it's a great thing, it's a wonderful thing, and but it's 2 years down the line,
yeah,
we're dealing with the economic reality of today. So that vision where we see families and children being, as Kim said, their education, especially at the most critical time, has
Mhm.
been, we created a strong foundation for them.
hmm,
We have a 2 year gap. And talking about those post-COVID babies, those post-COVID children, we have a 2 year gap before that promise is realized,
yeah,
right? And so it just, again, I'm struggling with how to articulate what my anxiety is because, again, it just feels like when you go to folks and if and you hear the celebration that we had, that we have won, like, universal access for families in early care and education, then we're coming back in the next legislative session to say, hey, we still need to fix this.
yeah.
Tammy, you're involved in talking to, different folks, and I do want to give folks some information about how they can raise up their voices. And I'm going to put you a little bit on the spot to say, what are
Go
some of the
for it.
things that Circle is thinking about to try to help to address and to resolve this issue?
Yeah, I think for us this year, we really do want to do the very difficult thing that we have to do this year is to go back and to ask for more assistance and to communicate to folks that the work that we've done up to this point is a stepping stone to the promise, right? That is coming hopefully in a couple of years. Again, we have the endowment. It is a lot of money. $300 million sound like a lot of money. It really isn't. But the endowment is,
And I'll say why it isn't, Tammy, because really what this system needs is $1 billion. So
right, right. I mean,
$300
we
million
we
is just a
we
down
talked about
payment.
that, yeah, in 2020, and the number was 1.7 billion, and you know, again, these are large numbers, and and to average folks, it seems intimidating, but it's what it takes for us to actually invest in our children and to ensure that every child has what, we all say we want in our state, an opportunity to be successful, to thrive. And I think for us, we're working with some local agencies and some local funders who've made it a priority for them this year to address some of the issues that are going on in our community. And we're going to be putting together some opportunities for providers to come to us, to bring their parents to us, to learn how to advocate for themselves, to learn how to navigate, their local politics and their local legislative bodies, whether that's at the town or the city level or up in Hartford. And so there's opportunities for us to do the advocacy piece. And I think a part of what we're going to be looking for is some kind of stabilization for our industry for the next 2 years, because what we cannot do is sacrifice these children who aren't going to make it until 2027. So that's going to be the very difficult thing for us to do. There'll probably be a lot of pushback because obviously there are a lot of people who are in need, lots of agencies that are, or were dependent on federal dollars that are no longer getting those dollars. And a lot of their good work over the years has been unfortunately lost to the current environment. But we are going to be moving forward as we often do. We were organized as an agency to do this kind of work, to raise the difficult topics and to have the difficult conversations. So we will not be backing down from that in the next 18 to 24 months.
And Kim, how do you see yourself meet in the moment? And it's even beyond childcare because you do so much in the community. So how do you see yourself meet in the moment? Because as you raised, there is steps towards having the government shutdown end, but they're only funding certain programs up until January 2026. And then we're back in the same position again. So, parents are going to be struggling, between now and then, beyond that, beyond even just care for kids and childcare. So how do you see yourself meet in the moment?
So, just a quick little story here. I was at this huge childcare conference in Atlanta, Georgia, last month. And, as I was sharing what the governor has done for the state of Connecticut for childcare, people were like, "Oh my goodness, you got your governor to do that? We can't even register people anymore. Once they're off, they're off." I said, "But we have a 2-year gap where we're not going to be able to take any more than what our cap is for children." And once again, they came back at me. "But you have kids there." And I said, "Yeah, I mean, we do, and our state is good for that. They are really striving hard to make this thing happen. But still, collectively, it's not just Connecticut. Long story short, it's not just Connecticut. It's all across the nation
Yeah.
where childcare is suffering really,
Yeah.
really badly. And I'm hearing some horror stories about how some schools are not even going to be able to negotiate. They're shutting down.
Mm.
They are shutting down. But a resolve. Here's what I think. We have a plan. We build relationships. We test the plan, and we retool it. We just repeat it again. We have a plan, build relationships, and we test it.
Yeah.
Because without the plan, there's nothing. Without testing or measuring, inspect what you expect. Without doing those things, it's not going to happen. So I think that we are really at the forefront as an advocacy group to really have the call of action, not just for other child care facilities, but also for parents. We got to get them on board. Well, actually, because they are the ones that are really impacted by this as well. And I think it's kind of parallel in terms of the schools being impacted and the parents being impacted. So let's Get on board. Let's create this plan, right? Let's build those relationships. And when I say build relationships, we have to really also talk about how we can educate them,
Yeah.
right? It's one thing to build relationships, but how can we build the relationships while educating as to what happened in the past, what's happening right now in the current times, and the possibilities of what can happen in the future if we don't, or I should say, if we don't move forward. And then we just test the model and just repeat the process all over again.
Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Kim. And what I will say for me, as we're getting ready to wrap up, it just feels like the conversation is so short and that
Sure.
we can't even get into the meat of this, the crisis. But I think what I'm going to do to try to meet the moment is have these conversations and to make sure that we're bringing you guys on back to lift up these things. What Circle does really very well is we push the conversation. We
Mm.
push the conversation in our relationship with legislators and with stakeholders and with the Office of Early Child Education. And I think, again, Inside Voices, we really need to use Inside Voices as a way to educate and let people know what's going on in the system. I think this is a minor step in that education process. I think us coming here to kind of sound the alarm to say, hey guys, there's a lot of pomp and circumstances around the fact that Connecticut has made this major step towards solving a childcare crisis for families. But there is a 2-year gap where lots of people are going to be hurt if we don't address in some way, shape, or form the Care for Kids crisis and make sure that every single provider is here to not only benefit from these future investments, but by preserving those providers, we are able to ensure that parents have choices. Because what
Yeah.
would invariably happen is when those smaller, vulnerable providers lose, you know, lose lose their ability to continue to serve families, it's much larger entities that are going to come in to take a place. Talking about parents, Kim and Tammy, I want to just share with you. I know you guys know, but I'm going to share with you anyway that the Office of Early Childhood is now starting public listening sessions around the endowment. And this is the perfect time for folks to get involved. Again, raise up your voices because OEC is now listening. They want to hear what do we do with this $300 million that eventually we hope will become $1 billion. They want to know how parents, how providers, how stakeholders want to see these funds spent. They will be at the Reggie Mayo School this week, this Wednesday, November 12th.
Well,
And I'm not sure where they're going to be in Waterbury, but November 18th, they'll be in Waterbury, and November 20th, they will be in Norwalk. And they do have listening sessions where you can go online and hear those sessions in Spanish. So for our Spanish speaking providers, and parents, we want to let them know that their information that will be online. Please go to Connecticut Office of Early Childhood website to find out more about these public listening sessions. And we are certainly going to publicize those as well through our social media. The OEC's website is www.ctoec.org. So make sure that you guys are going. Is it .org or is it .gov?
I think it's .gov.
Okay. Let me just check just to make sure because I thought it was .org, but I could.
Maybe you might be right, Georgia. I will say to that point, Georgia, we do have some wonderful partners in the legislative body as well as agencies like Office of Early Childhood that are at least willing to listen to the concerns of parents and families. So I do want to encourage folks to come out to these opportunities to to hear that because to Kim's point, I was in Las Vegas last month, and yeah, the challenge exists all across the country right now for children.
And for the folks, I put it for the OEC's website is /portal.ct.gov/OEC. So portal.ct.gov/OEC. So that is the OEC's website. You can certainly go and find out more about these listening listening sessions for sure in New Haven. If you are a resident in New Haven, a stakeholder in the early care system in New Haven, we have our public listening session with Acting Commissioner Elena Trueworthy. It is from 6 o'clock or 6:30?
I'm I'm not sure.
I think it's 6 o'clock. And it is at the Reggie Mayo School, and I just want to once again, let people know. I want to take the opportunity just to thank Tammy and Kim for being here to have this conversation publicly the way that we always have this conversation. Kim, do you have any last thing that you want to say?
Just bring the UPS. Come on, we're gonna uplift possibilities and solutions. Let's just bring it. Bring it, possibilities and solutions. And I think as long as we can all, get in the room and just talk about it, test it, measure it, we're going to move forward. And it's not anything that's going to happen, right away. It's definitely a timepiece. And we need to get ready for that it's going to take time, because I believe that, as we travel along this road, that we're kind of building it out as we move forward. So we don't know that maybe Connecticut does have a tried and true model, but this is all new for all of us.
All right. Tammy, final.
Thank you again, both of you women, for the work that you've done over several generations and many hundreds of children's lives that you've impacted. So all good. We'll be doing the hard work.
Yes. And again, I want to invite folks to come to the public listening session. It is at 6 o'clock at the Reggie Mayo School. And as I said, we're going to use Inside Circle to just raise these concerns. And just want to thank you all again for being here to lift that up along with me. And we'll look forward to these continued conversation.
Thank you so much, Georgia.
No problem.
Listening to Inside Voices on WNHHLP 103.5 FM.